Hey, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Lessons Learned, the dumbest thing I've ever done with money. My name is Suzanne, and I'm the head coach at Grace Financial Coaching. And I am so excited to welcome my girl, Cortney Kaveh. She is a financial coach for women entrepreneurs. Cortney guides her clients through habits-based, emotionally focused money coaching. Cortney is also a faith-based coach, meaning she teaches principles rooted in biblical wisdom, such as intentionally planning your money, learning how to save, living below your means, paying off debt, and of course, being generous. Cortney's focus is helping entrepreneurs consistently pay themselves from their business, louder for the people in the back, every single month without worrying about fluctuating income. Hey, Cortney, how are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me, Suzanne.
Yeah, so let's get right into that part. Tell me about what you do in your coaching practice, specifically as it relates to entrepreneurs.
Yeah, so I work with mostly women entrepreneurs who are needing help with their personal finances, but also their business finances because they both feed into each other, right? And most of the time, business owners historically, notoriously, I would say, pay themselves last or not at all if they're having a slow month, right? And they're not paying themselves first. It's they're paying expenses and whatever's left over, the scraps, that's what they pay themselves. And so what I help them do is, flip that on its head, pay themselves first, sustainably grow their business where they're, profitable and really get intentional about their expenses so that they can do that.
What is the biggest negative impact from trying to pay yourself from the scraps?
Burnout. Simple as that, Suzanne. It is when we are not properly paying ourselves and compensating ourselves, we get burnt out. We stop loving our business. We start our businesses because we want more freedom and options. We want flexibility. And what it ends up turning out is we get resentful. We're working so hard for so little reward. And it's amazing how the simple way that you structure and organize your business finances can change everything. And
Ugh.
so the biggest thing that it leads to is burnout. If we were paid from an employer less than what we deserved, that might not fly with us. So why do
Yeah.
we let it fly with us in our business? I don't think it's because we want it to. It's because we weren't taught growing up or in school about how to start a business, how to handle our money. So don't even get me started on the personal finance side, but just like the business before I started my business, I had never started a business. I was happy working for the man, getting my paycheck. I had no idea all the hats that business owners and entrepreneurs wear. And so learning to navigate handling my business finances was something completely new to me because
Yeah.
there was no paycheck anymore. I had to pay myself a paycheck. And how the heck do you do that? And so that's
Right.
what I that's what I really am passionate about, helping business owners with business financial literacy.
Yeah, and I'm guilty of this to some level. When I started my coaching practice, I set an amount that I would pay myself. And I stuck to that. And I probably stuck to it a little too long. And I am, for those people who have worked with me or our fellow coaches, they know that I am huge on sinking funds. And so I have my business checking and my business savings, and my business savings is for taxes and all of my expense sinking funds. And I think I probably didn't pay myself enough in the beginning using that type of formula, to the point where I was like, I was getting frustrated and I was saying, oh, I should be making more and blah, blah, blah. And maybe I bring my prices up. But sometimes at some point I had to look internally and say, you've been paying yourself the same thing for 2 years. If you worked at a company and you didn't get a raise for 2 years, you'd be saying something, wouldn't you?
Yes, so we tend to have a different standard with ourselves because we think that we have to do things a certain way to keep the business growing. And that's one of the biggest mistakes I see, Suzanne, is that we pay ourselves the minimum amount necessary so we can pour more money into the business to grow. And man, that's I call it kind of like shiny object syndrome. Like we're always seeing these fancy marketing things we could be doing, or do this and do that. It's gonna, make you so much money. And so sometimes we sacrifice paying ourselves what we maybe should, or to be a little more comfortable and keep the bills paid and all that. We sacrifice that part because we're trying to chase business growth. But I truly believe that you can prioritize paying yourself first and grow the business. It might look a little different because maybe you're learning to prioritize what's important when, and not just
Right.
trying to do all the things and spend all the money at once.
And let's make something very clear. Just because you have money put aside to grow your business doesn't mean you're putting it in the right places.
Exactly. Yep.
So
Exactly.
if you limit the ability, if you are paying yourself a greater amount, I totally subscribe to this. If you're paying yourself a greater amount and then you say, oh, I only have 500 left for that marketing affiliated program. I only have 500 left to do a course that I believe will help me grow my business. I think that's because unfortunately, I think sometimes we get taken, like you said, shiny object syndrome. Oh, this particular marketing program that's $8,000 this year will help me make $80,000. And that might not be the case.
Yeah, we can't count our chickens before they hatch. Like, as tempting as it is, we have to be super intentional with how we invest in our business and why, and the ROI and the risk all associated with that. I would say the second mistake that I see with business owners is going to be they're not making a plan for the month ahead, and they're not tracking expenses as they're spent. So I know you and I,
Mm,
as money coaches, financial coaches, we're all about this, but I see this a lot with business owners, that they don't have that intentional plan in place for their money. And then inevitably, like, money is leaking out throughout the month, and they look back and they're like, oh, where did all my money go, at the end of the month? I know it went somewhere. I'm still here. But it's not an intentional plan. So
right. Now, that also translates into the personal financial coaching that you do with people. So, when you're working with an entrepreneur, are you just looking at their business, or are you looking at both of the business budget, the household expenses? You're looking at it as a whole.
yeah, great question. So we look at both because they both inform the other. What you're paying yourself from your business is your personal paycheck, right? But then you have all of your personal expenses. So you have to look at both. When I work with a client one-on-one, we will usually prioritize the personal side first and then the business side, or do some of it concurrently if we're trying to figure out what their paycheck should be. So that can be both at the same time.
Gotcha. And that can be pretty eye-opening, right? Looking at somebody's personal
Totally.
budget and then looking at somebody's business budget, both of those things can be equally shocking.
Yeah, well, and your habits and what you if you have habits in one area, you probably have the habits in the other area as well. So if we're tightening up some spending, getting intentional with savings, that how you've been approaching that currently on one side will probably be the same story on the other side. So once we start to do that kind of work, it changes both as well.
Right.
So that's the cool part.
Definitely.
I would
Yeah.
say the last mistake that the most common one that I usually see with business owners and entrepreneurs is that they have some really high revenue months. It's very exciting, but they don't plan ahead to make that money stretch or last, and then things are tight. So I normally see this most commonly with like real estate agents, people who get high commissions, because
Yeah.
they're not always sure when the next closing is going to be, and so they get this nice big commission check. And let's say they are going to have some slow months coming ahead, and maybe they don't have a closing the next month or two, they
Oh, yeah,
struggle with
longer than that
making.
for sure, especially in real estate.
Yes, so it depending on how busy they are and how long they've been in business, all that, it can be months, right? This is not an uncommon thing. And
Right.
so I see them not making an intentional plan ahead of time to make that money stretch, or if they're not a real estate agent, maybe they even mistake this high month or these high back-to-back months as like their new normal. And then they make a spending plan in their head, kind of like, oh, this is how much I can be spending each month. And then it drops and then they panic. So that is a huge one, that I would say. You had to mention sinking funds. And one thing that I help business owners do is protect their income. And we establish what's called, as part of their business savings, an income variance fund, or a hills and
Good.
valleys fund is
Yep.
also another name for it. So we calculate the amount they need in business savings for that purpose, not for emergencies, for expected variances in income. And so that's one thing
Right.
that I help people do that they just don't usually have in place.
Yeah, it's that gap, right? We're filling that gap. This isn't the HVAC died and you need $15,000. This is we're filling in that gap of I usually bring in 5,000 and this month it was 2,000. And so now how are we filling that $3,000 delta in there?
Yeah, because you are going to have a certain amount of baseline, like minimum operating expenses that you need to spend each month to keep your doors open. So, what happens when the income drops below that? You have to have a plan and not swipe a credit card, take out a loan or line of credit, right? We have
Yeah.
we have money in your business savings just for that purpose, that you can continue to pay yourself first and pay yourself the amount you actually want.
Right. Oh, I love it. That's so great. It's so important. So the last thing I want to ask you is regarding specifically your business clients, is your opinion on people, small business owners who are utilizing their business account for real, true personal expenses. And I don't mean you're paying your Verizon Fios internet with your business account. A lot of people working from home these days, that's probably a viable expense on a tax form, right? But what is your opinion on somebody swiping their business card when you start working with them and you're like, hey, that's a really expensive restaurant near where you live. How did this show up on your business account?
Oh, Suzanne, you want to get me all riled up right now, don't you? We do not want to commingle personal and business funds, you guys. Okay, so if you hear me say this loud and clear. The reason why we don't want to mix personal and business spending, and what I mean by that is what Suzanne just said. If you have a personal account, you're charging business expenses to it, or you have a business account and you're charging personal expenses to it. That's what we mean by commingling. The reason we don't do that is you open yourself up for risk if you were ever audited, because now the IRS where they were just asking about your business before, it's all mixed. So now they're going through everything, personal
Right.
and business. In addition, if someone else were to sue you or come after your business and you don't have things like it will, again, same thing. They'll be going after everything because it is mixed. And if you're listening and you have an LLC and you're like, I'm fine, sure, that's one layer of protection. But again, if it's all mixed, they're looking at everything, whether it's the IRS or you being sued. So it's just risk. You just keep it clean, get different cards for the different accounts, don't mix your spending. If you and you can talk to your accountant too if there is some sort of mixing, how to go about creating a record for that. I'm personally an S corp, and my accountant has me keep an account. It's called an accountable plan, and if there is any accidental mixing or things like that, I record it on a sheet so that I can present that and say, hey, here's what
Did
happened.
that last month. Literally just grabbed the wrong card. I used my same
Yes.
bank for my business checking and my personal checking, and I literally just grabbed the wrong card. And I was like, oh, haven't done that in a couple of years, but I had to go in to my records and I had to make a note of it so that, and then I reimbursed myself. I reimbursed myself from my personal account to the business account, and I made those two entries offset one another with a note in there explaining the wrong card was utilized for this purchase. So,
Yep.
but I think your point
a lot of work. Oh, go ahead.
it is. It's a lot of work, but if you have the two set up, it's not a lot of work. It's only a lot of work when I grab the wrong card. So if you have the two set up, it's not a lot of work. But to your point, all of that stuff is setting a precedent and that's where you're going to get the IRS agent at your door. And that's where if you, God forbid, you are ever sued on a business level, they're going to say, oh, this person has had this commingling going on for years. So we're just going to go after both sides, their personal and their business.
Yep, exactly. And if this is all sounding like a lot of work, it's like Suzanne said, if you just you build out your structure, have the separate accounts, once it's flowing, it's not going to feel like a lot of work. But it's called being a business owner. It's called wearing all the hats. You are bookkeeper, you are owner, you are operator, you are marketer, you are all the things. Okay. So just get it, set in place and forget it. And if you're needing more support in this area of how the heck do I manage my business finances effectively, and if any of these things I was talking about, you're also working through, Suzanne's going to link in the show notes I have an hour-long free training on business finances. So I invite you to come check that out and get some more support in this area.
Yeah, definitely. And I know we have a lot of small business owners in all fields that watch this. So Cortney, I created this show a long time ago now to help people realize that we all make financial mistakes, but we can also learn from the experience of others before making some of those mistakes. So Cortney, what is the dumbest thing you've ever done with money?
Oh my goodness, I'm so not proud to talk about this, but you're right. Like we all have to know that even as financial coaches, back in the day, like we have made just some stupid decisions, and let's talk about it. So I was very blessed in the fact that I had gotten help with paying for college from my grandparents, but I did at one point have to take out a small student loan for something. I don't even remember what it was. It was like $5,000. But I used a part of that student loan to like buy jeans and clothes and do a ton of clothes shopping. Like I had more aid than I needed, and I chose to spend it on shopping. I'm not kidding, Suzanne. I probably had 15 pairs of jeans at one point, like expensive ones. Like they weren't Target jeans, okay?
Right.
Oh my goodness. So that was it for me, is using college student loan money to go clothes shopping and buy Starbucks and like all these silly things.
Yeah. So the average, oh my God, I don't even, we're up to the trillions in student loans right now. And I don't even know what the average is in terms of per person at this point. And even amongst my personal, the clients that I have personally, it ranges. I have people who have $10,000 left, and I have people who have $130,000 left on their student loans. And it's so crazy. And part of the issue, I think, is that kind of what happened to you. Hey, $5,000. Well, you didn't need the whole 5,000. You needed 4,000. You needed 3,500. You needed some chunk of that 5, but the 5 still showed up in your account.
Mm-hmm.
And so that difference, when we don't have these good habits in place, that's what that can result in.
Yeah, and there's not the education too in depth of the opportunity cost of just having that money. Like, hey, if you take out this money, here's how much you can expect, like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, how much you will have accrued just in interest on having that money out. And so for me, I feel like it would have painted a different picture if I knew that, okay, you take out 5,000 now, if you don't pay that amount off, like in 10 years, that's how much that will actually grow to. You will have paid, let's just throw something out there. Let's say you'll have paid $7,000 to have that $5,000,
Right.
And so there wasn't a lot of financial education, enough financial education on just taking the money out as an 18-year-old at that time. It's just silly.
It's so crazy. I know. And I look back and I'm like, I'm one of those people with like a late birthday for the state that I lived in. And so I was 17 for a good few months when I got to college. And it's like, there is no 17-year-old that I am aware of right now whom I would go send to a private school at what my parents were paying at the time. And I did walk away with some student loans. But to be honest with you, my parents could have paid the whole amount if they wanted to. They wanted me to have something to pay off myself. Mm-hmm. And so that was my lesson. That was one of my lessons learned for sure, because I let that student loan amount it was somewhere around 20, just under 20. I let that sit there for way too long. And this is back when the interest rates were it was like 4%. I work with people now, their interest rates are 9%.
Ooh.
Yeah. The ones who are going to school like now, in this year. And so it's unbelievable to think about the difference. If you had a piece of paper in your hand and said, hey, this 5,000 is going to cost you X, this 20,000 is going to cost you Y, these 4 years are going to cost you $250,000 if you don't pay it off early. I mean, how much would that change what the education system looked like?
You wouldn't believe how shocking it is to people when I pull up this debt reduction tool I have, plug in all the numbers and show them, hey, if you keep paying this at the minimum amount required, here's how much total you will have paid in interest by that end date. And it's always in the thousands of dollars, right? Like there's never a time where I do this for someone and it's not in the thousands of dollars.
Right.
And so again, having that information ahead of time would have painted a totally different picture for me and would have helped me understand the value or just the opportunity cost there.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
and this does have a happy ending. I would have let my loan hang around for way longer than necessary if I didn't have someone come into my life and want to marry me and ask me to pay off that loan before we got married. I paid off that sucker before. I paid it off before we got married, and I'm so grateful that that was asked of me to do that, because then it was gone out of our life. We got to start our marriage, you know, kind of debt free. He was accumulating his own student loans at the time in his program, but consumer debt free with that. So it did go away like quickly than it would have if I was just on my own, left to my own devices.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, now I have to ask your husband, what made him ask you that? Have you ever picked his brain to say, what was your, I mean, I'm sure you guys have talked about this, but what was his background with money that he said, I want to marry somebody who doesn't have any debt? Or if they have a lot of debt, they're focused on paying it off fast. What was his methodology with that?
Oh, he was straight up worried. He was gonna marry a spender. And so he basically wanted to, I think, have some reassurance that once we got married, I wasn't going to be totally all over the place with our money, right? And so that was, he did not give me an ultimatum. It just was, hey, before we get married, I like to see you pay this thing off. And I did, you know, it was all out of love and respect. It just, I think he was worried. Yeah, he was worried. And so he's a saver. He always has been. He's always been very good with money. I have historically not been, as I had mentioned. He joked that if I had 25 cents left in my bank account, I would take it out and go spend it on a gumball. Like I was a spender. So he was worried, Suzanne. And I was happy that I could show him what I was capable of and that I would be a good steward of our money once married.
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, I don't think what he asked you was selfish. I'm sure there is someone who's going to be watching this who's going to say, that is so unbelievably selfish. I can't believe he asked that of her, blah, 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 blah. But that is not selfish, because one of the number one reasons put on divorce decrees in North America today is money, is that there was a money problem, that there was a money issue, finances. That's the one of the top reason put on there. There's usually other reasons, but that's the one that shows up most frequently. And so he wasn't being selfish for himself. He was being selfish for both of you and for your marriage.
100%. And we had, and I know people have different opinions on this, but we had intended to combine our finances once married. And so this was an important step in our relationship to show that we could work on money together, have common goals, accomplish those goals together. So that was just what we did.
I love that. That is so awesome. I did not know I was going to learn that about you today. I've known you for so long now. Well, guys, I want to thank Cortney again. All of her contact information is going to be in our show notes, as always. And if you tuned in late, make sure you go back to the beginning of this episode, because I made a lot of notes in the beginning. So thank you again, Cortney, for joining us and sharing your honesty and your financial blunders. And I hope everybody will join me again next week for another episode of Lessons Learned, the dumbest thing I've ever done with money. And make sure you click that subscribe button on the YouTube channel. Thanks again, Cortney.